Okay, and hello again. I think we are ready to start. We are now recording this webinar. I want to welcome everyone again to Pathways to Adult Services. Thanks for being with us today. I'm going to hand it over to our presenters in just a second. First, quick little orientation. This is a webinar, so you're just going to see the presenters. We won't be able to see you. You can chat with each other as an audience in the chat box. And periodically throughout the presentation, we will take your questions. If at any point you have a question, you can click the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen and type in your question. That'll get sent to our panelists. And periodically throughout the webinar, we will pause to answer some of your questions as best we can. I want to mention one more time that we are recording this and it is being live streamed on our YouTube channel. And I think with that, I'm ready to turn it over to Sharon, Sue, and Tara, and Deb, who have all the information you really want today. So go ahead, Sharon.
Thank you, Mark.
Sorry,
Hi, everyone.
Sue. I'm sorry, Sue.
It's okay. Thank you, Mark. So welcome. Today, we're presenting on Pathways to Adult Services. It's an overview for individuals with developmental disabilities. And at RIPIN, we created this presentation so that it would serve as a general overview and expose you to the different systems of care that you may come across as you are transitioning through high school and into the adult world and adult services. So I'm here with, as Mark said, with my colleagues, Sharon, Tara, and Deb. And the services that we're going to be sharing, again, are based on eligibility. And we do have information. We have another webinar that folks will be doing on Thursday that Sharon will tell you more about in a little bit. Our students, I am one of the program directors at RIPIN, but I'm also a parent. And so I have had the privilege of navigating these systems on behalf of my own child and learning from them and really trying to help empower and support her so that she could create the most meaningful life for her. So what's next? So I think one of the things that's most difficult at raising a child with a disability and going through the educational process and the educational system and participating in that is, as families, we're leaving a system of entitlement and going into a system of eligibility. So some of the families that we support express that it's really difficult. They feel like they're starting all over again. They feel like day one when they first got a diagnosis and perhaps maybe we're receiving services through early intervention. So we like to be able to provide educational trainings like this one to help our families navigate that. And we also, we're working, with staff, and staff are supporting families one-on-one, whether it's via the phone or video chat. We are working remotely now, but in the past, we do have our main office in Warwick, and really supporting families as they're transitioning through that period of time. What's important to understand and to remember is that every individual will have a unique journey. Not every student or every child will be eligible for every service, but we want to make sure that you're aware of the different options that are out there and things that may be important to you. One thing we like to say at RIPIN, and Deb coined this phrase, we're hoping that you walk away with more questions than you came with. And that is really the measure of a good training. When you walk away and we're helping you develop those questions so that you can go back to the professionals and the clinicians and the folks that you're working with to help provide that team support for your child. So what is transition? Well, simply put, it's helping individuals and families in the planning for the future, for their long-term goals and sometimes their short-term goals. But really what's important is planning early, starting early and working with our children so that we're creating those middle and high school years experiences that will build on each other like a building block and help them be prepared for the day after the school bus stops coming. You know, when you're an adult now, as we go into transition, and making sure that they're prepared. So, and making sure that they're ready to start self-advocating on their own, perhaps still with a little bit of help. You know, we like those safety nets, but that's what transition means. So I'm going to turn the mic over to my friend Shan, who's going to walk us through what we should be doing and how to prepare.
Thank you, Sue. Although the transition process in Rhode Island begins at age 14, for today's purposes, our presentation is focusing on what you need to do 2 to 3 years before leaving the school. So for some students, that might be age 18. For others, it might not be till 21 or 22. But whatever your anticipated date of graduation is, parents and teachers should begin using that IEP document as a tool to start preparing for life after high school. The IEP process, you can use it for students to have not only their voice, but their choice at the table. And that's asking them what their hopes, their dreams, their wishes are. What do they want to do when they leave school? Do they want to go to college? Do they want to live with mom and dad? Do they want to keep playing basketball? What is it that they want? And all of those questions can be answered by reviewing their student transition goals in the following 3 areas of education and training, employment, and independent living. The data used in the IEP should be current, because as students are exposed to new environments, different job sites, work trials, participating in daily living skills, their choices might change, and their ideas of what they want to do might change. So for example, I had a student that really wanted to work with cars until he got a job working in the mailroom. And then he realized that he could use his people skills all day long, and it changed his whole trajectory for life. For some families, it might be volunteering at an animal shelter because the student really likes kitties, or maybe for some of you, employment's not on the radar right now. Maybe it's transportation, maybe it's learning how to make a purchase or keeping your belongings safe. But what's important to emphasize is that wherever the student's dreams are, whether you're going to college or you have significant medical needs, the transition goals that are in that IEP will help guide the team to what the student wants for their future, and to work together as a team, families and schools, to get as close to that dream as possible. Another step that teachers take is to prepare families is by inviting adult service providers to the table. So you might have already attended an IEP meeting where you had representatives that want to talk about what's coming next. And for parents, you might want to think about what's going to happen with transitioning out of the pediatrician's office, or decision-making options that are available. For the students, your IEP is a great place for you to practice those advocacy skills. You'll be participating in career assessments. You'll have job tryouts. You'll learn how to start asking for help in situations, real life experiences, and it's all being done in a safe and supported environment. So you're alone, you're independent, but you're not alone, because you've got your staff, you've got your family there supporting you and helping you along the way. We know that this slide has a lot of information on it, but that's why we want to stress here how important it is for families and schools to work together to make good decisions, because we know that families want to make good decisions, but they want to make informed decisions as well. And the schools can help by providing information about what's available in your community. And we'll be introducing some of these agencies as we move along today's workshop. Next slide. So Sue already touched on entitlement versus eligibility. As long as a student remains under the school umbrella, they're getting their services through the school department, and they're entitled to a free and appropriate public education. They have their IEP, they have their services, their lists evolved, and those services are coming from the school department. However, when the student graduates and leaves the school and exits their supports, they are no longer entitled to FAPE. As an adult, the services are dependent on eligibility criteria as well as funding availability. So it's important to know that just because you receive services in high school does not automatically qualify you for services in the adult world. The criteria is much different for an adult than it is for a child. And it's also important to note that even if students were found eligible for adult services in high school, they follow these steps now. These services don't begin until you exit the school. So that could be, again, at age 18 or age 22. And that's why transition planning is so, so important. Before I review today's agenda, Mark, do we have any questions yet?
Not as yet, Sharon. I will remind the audience that if you have a question, you can type it. You can click the Q&A button and type in your question. We'll do our best to answer it. We do have one comment regarding homeschooling and asking if we can address homeschooling when it comes to a lot of these areas. And while we are often going to refer to schools and districts, I'm sure most of this is applicable to a homeschool child or a child in a different educational setting.
Absolutely, Mark, because what we're covering are all public services that whether you're doing homeschooling or you're in a private school setting or a, public, you have you're eligible. You have the right to apply for these services.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's the agenda that we're going to follow today. These are general areas that we're going to cover within our Pathways to Adult Services series. Today's focus content is on transitioning out of high school. So for those of you that are interested in the Division of Developmental Disabilities, we would encourage you to join us on Thursday when we'll be presenting our Developmental Disabilities Process webinar, and that's on Thursday, August 20th from 4 to 5. Mark also mentioned today that the resources will be available to you after this webinar is finished. And they're also available on our website. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Tara, and she's going to begin reviewing the SSI process.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Tara Hayes. I am the Family Voices Manager here at RIPIN, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about some services that are available to you and your child when your child becomes an adult. So first, we're starting with SSI, which means Supplemental Security Income. And Supplemental Security Income is when you are deemed to have a disability based on the SSI SSA guidebook of disabilities. You may be eligible for a certain income to help support you being able to be more participatory in the community. And so some children, if they're in the NICU or some families if they have low income and their child has a disability, they may have SSI. So some of you may know about accessing SSI with a child, but as you know, it considers the parent's income. In order for the child to be eligible, the family has to be eligible, and it considers all the family's income. And so once a child becomes an adult and turns 18, that eligibility process changes. They decide that the child is an adult, and so as an adult, they're only counting that adult's income. And so they may be eligible for SSI if they have a low enough threshold for income. In Rhode Island, if you receive SSI, you are also eligible to receive Medicaid. And Rhode Island has 3 Medicaid managed care organizations. There's Neighborhood Health Plan, Tufts Healthcare, and United Healthcare. And so you will have access to a Medicaid managed care plan, as well as the Medicaid fee for service that comes from EOHHS, and you get the anchor card with that. In addition to that, there are some resources that are allowable, and a lot of that information will be found in the documentation that you will see after this presentation. And we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So there is a difference. Many of you may have heard about SSDI as compared to SSI. And SSDI is for individuals who have insured disabled individuals. So that means that they've had some sort of income in the past that they've paid into SSI. And so instead of receiving SSI, now they're going to receive SSDI. there's a lot of different ways that people can access those services. So definitely encourage you to look more into the Social Security Administration website and other webinars to see about eligibility for these things. But I will say that you know, the income that you can access with SSI can be very beneficial to young adults because they will be getting a check to themselves where they can use it to start a checking account or a savings account. If they don't have one, they can learn how to manage their finances and their resources a little bit better, and hopefully become more independent with their income. Next slide. The next thing we're going to talk about is healthcare and transition for teenagers. So as your child ages, you may notice that they are become bigger, and they're the bigger person in the pediatrician's office, and the tables get smaller and everything else is kind of smaller, the scales and things like that. And so as your child grows, you want to think about, if they are going to a pediatrician's office, to how you're going to proceed with their healthcare as they become an adult and as they have to start making healthcare decisions for themselves. And so, it's important to kind of start thinking about this again a few years before you want to do it, because you may want to consult with your pediatrician, primary care doctors, with your community to see, well, who do you go to and who do you go to, and is there somebody who specializes in this kind of diagnosis, this kind of disability, or has a little bit more familiarity with that. And that's important because you want to get some good feedback, and you want to have trusted resources to know, where you may want to send your child. And again, when your child turns 18, if you do not have guardianship over them, they are not necessarily required to share their healthcare information with you. And so those are conversations that you want to have with your child as they're 16, 17, getting older, because as they age, there's certain things that the doctors kind of tell you less and less. And sometimes children may not understand things the way they're described to them by the doctor, and they may say, no, mom or dad, I want you in the room with me because I need that little added guidance and input. And so those are conversations you need to have with your child to see what they're comfortable with, what you're comfortable with, and how you can be a productive and helpful to them in learning how to manage their healthcare on their own. Next slide. So Medicaid, we kind of talked a little bit about Medicaid, where that comes from SSI, but there is other ways to access the Rhode Island Medicaid program for adults in Rhode Island. And so Medicaid pays for medical and health related services for eligible Rhode Islanders. And the population we're talking about today is adults, right, between 18 and 64. Some children with special needs may be 18 and have Katie Beckett. And so we'll talk about Katie Beckett on the next slide. But right here, we just want to say that, they can access Medicaid on their own as long as they meet the eligibility criteria, which is income level, the federal income level on the federal poverty level, and they meet the asset test. Next slide. So Katie Beckett is only an asset. There's only an asset test for Katie Beckett for the individual. So kind of like SSI only covers individuals over 18 and only not only covers them, only asks them for their resources and income at age 18. Katie Beckett asks from birth to 19 for only the child's income and resources. So, they have to be a Rhode Island resident. They have to, meet the Social Security definition of disability, but they also have to meet a level of care criteria set forth by the state. So it is a little bit challenging. You may meet the income threshold easier with Katie Beckett than SSI, but you may not meet the definition of disability as easy as you may for Social Security. And so Katie Beckett does run until the child's 19th birthday, but you want to start thinking about applying for SSI prior to that, perhaps when the child's about 17 and a half, almost 18, and because the SSI benefit comes with a monetary benefit, whereas the Medicaid Katie Beckett is just the Medicaid, and it's not really any different Medicaid services based on, Medicaid is typically Medicaid. It covers pretty much almost everything that is covered as a child. And they can, and again, they only count the child's income. So sometimes that makes things a little easier to be able to access Medicaid, so you can get the Medicaid needed services that we're going to talk about, I believe, on the next slide. Oh, nope. So this is one more slide of Medicaid, but this, you can go to the next slide, Deb. Thank you. Sorry about that. So we do have one more slide just to kind of wrap up what it means and the eligibility that individuals need to meet it to know if they are eligible for Medicaid. And that's they're 18 or older, they're a Rhode Island resident, and they can get it through SSI, or they can get it if they have less than 138% of the federal poverty level and less than $400,000 in resources. And more information about that can be found at the Executive Office of Health and Human Services website. Okay, so here we are with Cedar Family Centers, and these are like the services and the benefits that I talked about that when you're eligible for Medicaid, you can access. And these benefits are actually available to children from ages 3 to 21. So it kind of can support you while you're transitioning to adulthood, because we know that some of those services that you're applying for take time to get into place. So this may be a way to compensate for those services in the meantime. And so again, there's criteria. There is you're eligible for Medicaid, so that's whether by disability or by income. And then you have to have 2 or more chronic conditions, or have one chronic condition and be at risk for another, or you can have severe mental illness. And those services that Cedar can provide you with are a true care coordination service, where they help to put together what your family needs are. We put it in a plan. We create goals and objectives, and those goals and objectives can be around obtaining clinical services, providing referrals to other community supports, providing education and prevention promotion for health, physical and mental health screenings, transitional care, and family advocacy. And as many of you know, RIPIN does a lot of that. So there is only 2 Cedar Family Centers right now. So you can look on the RIPIN website or on the EOHHS website to find more about that information. And next slide. Okay, so Cedar Family Center staff, they're really experienced professionals who have been there. In our case, they're peers. And they meet you where your family's at and help to provide you with an idea of what kind of services can be put in place in order for your family to be successful. And then some of the other things that they can connect you with include home-based therapeutic services, such as the applied behavioral analysis services, Kids Connect, which is typically something that younger kids access because it has to do with daycare, personal assistance services and support. So this is very valuable for families because it really can help families and the child to really flourish and grow, and figuring out what daily activities of life need to be done, what safety skills do they need to understand, what social circles can they get themselves involved in order to be more of a member of their community. And then respite is really important for kids because they get to, a chance to not have to be with mom and dad all the time, but it's also important for mom and dad, and it's all, or any caregiver. It's important for self-care and knowing that you have access to, this program where you may have to find your own worker, which may not always be the easiest thing, but when you find somebody that you trust and can hang out with your child while you can go get a coffee, go shopping by yourself, or even maybe possibly have a date night. Those are things that we really want families to invest in and access because they deserve it. And it's not easy to raise a child with special needs, but we we're all here doing it and making the best of it. So I think that is all I have. So Mark, do we have any questions at this time?
Just one right now. Someone asks, I thought it was no longer needed. I thought Medicaid was no longer needed for Cedar.
So Medicaid is not needed to access the services that Cedar can connect you with, but Medicaid is needed to access Cedar. So you could yourself as a family member or a caregiver go to an agency that provides HBTS or PASS or respite and access it directly if you feel like you have, you don't need somebody else in your life to coordinate your care and things like that. But a lot of times, especially early on, or if there's a new diagnosis, or if something new pops up in your family's, you know, in your family's, that's maybe outside of your family's plan, you didn't realize it or expect it, then you may want to talk to CEDAR, because they can guide you in the right direction. You don't have to stay engaged with them for any amount of time in particular. You know, you can work with them briefly, or you can work with them fairly long term, depending on what your needs are. It's kind of like if you don't know where to go, or you think you need a little bit more help understanding what you may be eligible for, that's, you know, that's a good use for CEDAR. But families do not have to access CEDAR in order to do that, but they do have to have Medicaid in order to access CEDAR.
Okay, great. I'm not seeing any more questions at the moment, but folks, feel free to keep submitting your questions as they come to you. Next, I'm going to turn it back over to Sue.
Hi. So every state has a vocational rehabilitation agency, and in Rhode Island, we have the ORS, which is the Office of Rehabilitation Services. Their mission is to help individuals with disabilities obtain, maintain, gain employment, become employed. And they are funded by state and federal dollars. And ORS can really help coordinate services that are going to help our students become employed and stay employed. So who's eligible? So there's three basic rules of thumb. An individual who has a disability. The disability is a substantial barrier to employment. And the term substantial barrier to employment is pretty broad, okay? So originally, ORS worked primarily with adults, but they also work with students. And in Rhode Island, our ORS has assigned a counselor to every high school in Rhode Island, and counselors that are serving the different regions, which is very helpful because they develop relationships with the high school transition coordinators and with those IEP teams. A person who, and certainly the individual who will be eligible will be someone who would benefit from their services. A benchmark, you know, you might think if an individual is receiving SSI or SSDI, they're going to be presumed eligible for ORS services. Now, what to expect when you become involved with ORS, and typically they're coming to the IEP table when the student is in their junior year. Think of it 16 years and older, depending on what types of services and supports that student needs, what that student's personal journey is looking like. When you meet with the ORS counselor, they're going to be putting together and working with you on developing an independent plan for employment. And the partnership between the ORS counselor and the student is critical. It's very important. They're working hard to establish a relationship and a rapport so they can really get to know the student quickly and identify some of the services that would be appropriate for that student. This is all done through the IEP process. On this particular slide, you can see some of the services that may be right for your child: counseling, guidance, assistive technology, assessments of all different types, whether it's vocational, transition, employment, college assessments, job development and placement, vehicle or home modifications, post-employment services, job training and job supports, as well as on-the-job training. Typically, ORS counselors are working with our kids for about 18 to 24 months, depending on what the circumstances are and what experiences that they need before they leave high school. Deb.
Can I add to that? Just from the idea, for those of you who are parents out there right now, and we're starting to have those conversations at the IEP table, when that ORS counselor is invited to your child's IEP, it's really important to remember that they are going to be working with your child. They're going to be wanting your child to take control at this point. If I was to go back one slide, it talks about that person being able to benefit from vocational rehab services, that they're able to become employed. So the idea is that they have some self-determination on their own. They understand those pieces. When at times parents may get frustrated because the child is not contacting the ORS counselor, but it really is important. This is actually part of the, I don't know if it'll be part of the eligibility process, but part of the idea that ORS is looking to work with those students who are certainly should have that access to employment. So all students should have access to that employment services, but they are going to be really wanting to working with your child, which we'll talk more about. Sharon will be talking about as it relates to self-advocacy and decision-making.
Thank you, Deb. ORS also has an excellent website. It's easy to maneuver and navigate, and they have some really great resources on it. Your particular comment, I can appreciate, and it reminds me of Sharon's earlier slide. What can we be doing 2 to 3 years before my child leaves school? What do we need to be preparing for? And I think families, sometimes it's hard just to get through dinner tonight, and you don't think about, hey, we need to work on self-advocacy. Okay, so maybe at age 14 or 13 or 12, let me give you some small choices to make. You know, what would you like for dinner? Or, you know, let's work on ordering off a menu. But those are all the skills that build up to the skills that our kids are going to need to advocate for themselves when it comes to, you know, what they want to do for employment, what their strengths, their goals, their dreams are. So thank you for adding that comment. Now I'm going to turn it over to my friend Sharon.
Do we have any questions? We have to, yeah, I'm just wondering if we have any questions up to this point, because that was a lot of information we just covered in the last 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, we have a couple in now. The first is regarding ORS. Does ORS automatically get involved in the junior year of high school, or do you need to request their presence?
So that's a great question. Thank you. Typically, the case manager, your child's case manager for their IEP, should be inviting them, but feel free to ask your case manager if you haven't heard them talking about it yet. Schools should be making the linkages to the adult agencies, whether it's ORS or BHDDH, which is Behavioral Health Care, Developmental Disabilities and Hospitals, or any other agencies that can help provide the supports for your child.
Okay, very good. And next question, my son is 17, will be 18 in February. I'm in the process of gathering all materials, evals, medical reports, etc., to start applying. Where should I start first? Guardianship, SSI, or BHDDH?
That's a great question. We're going to, in a few slides, Sharon's going to talk more about guardianship and alternatives to guardianship, including supported decision-making. So I think we might want to check that out first before we respond to the question.
Okay, very good. That's
All
all
right.
the questions we had at the moment.
Take it away, Sharon.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Next slide. Okay, so the last topic we're going to talk about here today is supported decision making and how are we preparing students to make their own decisions. I will tell you from my experience of working with families for over 4 years that this topic not only brings up the most questions, but also the most fear in families, especially when they start thinking, what if? What will happen if? Parents and schools want students to have skills that they need to be successful, but kids with disabilities often have those extra challenges. So that's why, again, we don't mean to sound like a broken record, but it's so important to have the student actively involved in the transition goals and the planning for their adulthood, especially when they reach the age of majority. Age of majority, it refers to the time when rights that were afforded to parents now become the student's responsibility. So for example, they are now driving the IEP meeting and making decisions. Doesn't mean that the parents can't still be involved, but each district has their own process. So parents may need to ask their IEP teams about a waiver that maybe they can sign in order to continue to help make those decisions. So what happens at age 18? In the eyes of the law, students are presumed to be adults, and kids with disabilities are no different. Parents have options, though, when it comes to providing decision-making support for their individuals that lack the capacity to be able to make those choices independently. One of those options is guardianship. However, this is looked upon as very the most serious and the most intrusive of all the options that are available, and should only be used when no other alternatives to supported decision making can help the individual. Okay, guardianship means removing the individual's rights to make important life decisions. And it's also the most expensive of all the options. There's a process of petitioning a court. You've got a lawyer, you've got a judge, you've got legal fees. And now if you're granted guardianship, you've now invited the state into your relationship between the adult, the guardian, and the student who's now 18, unable to make decisions, is now awarded the state. It sounds a bit too restrictive, then maybe you can ask some of these other questions to consider if other options might be a good choice. Can the student represent himself? Can she speak on her own behalf? Can she give informed consent? Do they use good judgment? And do they understand consequences of their behavior? If the answer is yes, then maybe an alternative to guardianship might be a better choice. So alternatives can accomplish what most parents want to accomplish without stripping away the decision-making rights of the student. For example, if a person has difficulty managing their personal care, such as eating regular meals or taking medication or getting themselves ready in the morning, they might need some kind of personal assistance, not guardianship. Or maybe they need help managing their monthly expenses, but they still want mom and dad there to make the big decisions, like the healthcare decisions. So when you think about what kinds of decisions these young adults will be making as an adult, an alternative to guardianship should always be explored extensively. Other alternatives to guardianship are considered a supported decision-making model. It's rather than one person helping you make decisions, you now have a whole network of people that you invite. So for example, my dad might be really good at finances, so I'm going to want him to help me balance my checkbook, and I'm going to ask him before I maybe make a big purchase. But if I'm having trouble in a relationship, or if I had a fight with my friend, I'm not going to go to my dad. I want to go to my aunt. I'm going to go to my sister. I want to go find somebody that knows how I feel comfortable with interacting. So again, you gather your friends, your family, your trusted adults you formalize your agreement on paper, and then they go out and gather the information that then helps you make the decision with support. One final note here before we move to more questions would be, you want to make sure that you use somebody who specializes in the area of special needs when making important legal decisions. We would encourage you to stay away from general attorneys and look for someone who has the expertise in supported decision-making or supporting individuals with disabilities. You'll see on the little box, Disability Rights Rhode Island is a fabulous resource when it comes to gathering more information, and they represent the individual first. And with that, I'm going to ask Mark if there's more questions. Oh, looks like Deb's got something to add. Go ahead, Deb.
I know, you're shocked. One of the things that I wanted to add related to the idea of guardianship, a lot of times families at this age will hear school departments, will hear relatives, will hear other people use that word guardianship. You don't hear people talking about, hey, have you thought about power of attorney for Matthew as it relates to his education? Nobody says that. And the word guardianship gets thrown around a lot. And it's a lot of times it's what parents run at. What's important to remember, who your child is right now may not be the same child in 5 or 10 years from now. Starting slow, looking at this from, if there's areas that might need a power of attorney kind of a support, what Tara talked about earlier, you know, kind of going into the pediatrician office, the idea of decision-making, I always talked over my kids. I should have done a way better job, because when they became adults and without disabilities, they didn't always have the right questions for their doctors. But the idea is they keep growing. You're going to hear the word guardianship a lot. And what we want you to really be focusing on from the time that child is born is how they make their own decisions. Because that process is, as Sharon said, it's very serious. Not only, I hadn't thought of that language, but she's absolutely right. It's expensive, and it's as equally expensive to reverse it. Children that, or adults that have guardianship are also not allowed to vote. That was very clearly on a ballot the other day. As part of a checkbox. So you've got to really understand that that's a very serious step. And we have so many other great alternatives in Rhode Island that parents can be thinking about.
Deb, if I could just piggyback on what you're saying, one misconception that existed years ago for a long time was that if folks had guardianship, their child couldn't be arrested. And we learned that that's not true. And unfortunately, that was a primary reason for many folks applying for guardianship for their child. So, you know, I just wanted to make sure people are going into these situations with eyes wide open.
The idea of guardianship doesn't give that child or that young adult any more safety. They still have to follow the law. It doesn't mean that we're some kind of a protection or a wall between them and decisions, you know, bad decisions that could be made. So it's really important to understand that. And Sue's right. She's saying that because, you know, some of us have lived through that. And if we'd known what was being presented today in this workshop, you know, maybe different decisions would have been made or can still be made. Any questions, Mark, for us, for them, mostly?
Yes, we have a few now. One question is asking, how does the majority process work for kids who cannot make their own decisions because of developmental disabilities? Do the parents still get a say if the student cannot speak or advocate for themselves? I think we've talked about a lot of the different options already. And really, I think the big takeaway for me has been that there are so many different options and maybe things that people might have not considered.
It's very challenging. Oh, sorry, Sue.
No, I was, okay. So when any child turns 18, they all become an adult in the eyes of the law, regardless of the significance of their disability. I see Amy asked that question, and Amy, parents don't have any legal recourse or any rights as far as speaking on behalf of the child, regardless of the significance of the child's disability, unless they have guardianship. So power of attorney, Sharon spoke about power of attorney. Power of attorney could be applied for in one of 4 different areas. And we're seeing a lot of people do that today with a lot of success. And that kind of lends into the other question, I think, Mark, that you've got in the queue. You can apply for power of attorney when a child turns 18 on different areas where the student child needs help with. And sure, at 21, if you want to revisit that, go right ahead, you know. when you think about caring for our elderly loved ones, we try to give them as much decision-making as long as they can. And, you know, as we age, different, you know, we may have disabilities that manifest and end up becoming less able to make decisions for ourselves. So there's no law preventing you from revisiting these issues when you turn 21. Deb, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I like what you just said about, you know, like our parents, for example, and we have to look at it that way. The difference that happens, we assume our parents, because they're our elders, they've gone ahead of us. We assume their ability, their ableness, but yet when it comes to our children, and this is a very emotional decision. This is not an easy, when you have to even start to remotely think about that, because you get flooded with all the other things. Will he ever drive a car? Will he ever get married? Will he ever hold a job on his own? Will she be able to live on her own? All those things. And you get bombarded with the idea that, oh my gosh, they're 18, I have to make this decision right now. And the person that I look in front of me, I don't think they can. Now, here's the other thing about parents. We only offer one perspective, our perspective. And there's a lot of pieces that play into it. Our emotions, our maybe our grief, maybe our journey to this point. Those kind of decisions bring other people, have those conversations with trusted members of your family, other people that have a piece of that child's life, even if that child's never spoken a word. Because just because we sometimes think, it's hard for us as parents, especially if we have a nonverbal child, that doesn't mean they're not able to communicate. I have a child who can speak words, who's now 35. He's not always able to express his intentions, but there's other ways that we can gauge his wants and needs. And so we need to take that into consideration. And sometimes that's really hard when your child's 17 and 18 and you think they should look like every other 17 or 18-year-old. Bring other people to the table and have that decision, and then talk to those type of attorneys. One of the things that Sharon said about if you're definitely, you've done a lot of research and you're going towards guardianship, we all can't say enough. Find the right attorney to do that. But when it comes to all those other pieces around, can they take care of themselves? Maybe they just need a little support around their IEP and their education stuff. There's a lot of other ways for that supported decision-making, and that can go past 18. You don't have to make those decisions at that point unless really your child is so incapacitated. Talk to your doctors, talk to the other people that are involved in their lives. It's a tough one.
And I would just say that you could do an entire webinar on guardianship alternatives and supported decision-making. And we have partnered with organizations, Disability Rights Rhode Island, the Rhode Island Developmental Disabilities Council, folks at the Sherlock Center, and the link is in the chat to our recorded webinars that we've done with them. A whole hour devoted to topics like supported decision-making and alternatives to guardianship. So feel free to check those out for an even deeper dive on that. The only other question at the moment regards certificates, which yes, we can get you some. And that's it for right now. I don't know if we want to give folks who might be typing in a question just a minute or two. We can let Sharon wrap up.
Can someone tell us a little bit more about the webinar on Thursday? What will that cover?
So our webinar on Thursday is going to walk us through the developmental disabilities process. And that's all the way from starting with the application and collecting the documentation, all the way through being found eligible, through another process called a supports intensity scale, to picking what kind of funding tier, actually what kind of funding tier you get based on that SIS overview. And then what do you want to use your supports? Do you want to use self-directed? Do you want to go traditional agency-based? And what kind of support, what does the support plan look like in the adult world? So,
Excellent.
soup to nuts.
We have one question now about housing. What are the housing options in Rhode Island?
That's a separate webinar.
Yeah, that's a big topic unto itself.
That's definitely, yeah.
Well, you know, housing for who? Who, you know what I mean? You know, there's housing for everybody. So what do you mean when you're asking about housing? Maybe you could type that in the chat. Are you talking about group homes, or are you talking about
Shared living arrangements?
living? Are you talking about the adult service world? So up till now, we're talking about, you know, for lots of people with disabilities, whether there's a learning disability or certainly as, you know, to the other end of the scale, as far as individuals who have more challenging disabilities that are going to need more support. Housing is a big one. So let's see, did anyone write back in the chat? Group homes or shared living. That comes up in our next webinar a little bit. It comes up a little bit more on Thursday, but you guys want to tackle that at all? Like, I wouldn't do a deep dive, but maybe just touch on it a little. Yeah, all jump. Go ahead. Go ahead, just jump right in.
I think they should come back on Thursday.
Do all the talking, because you know where I'm going to go. Group homes, the idea, first of all, of group homes doesn't live out there like an island like it did 20, 30 years ago. You don't just write your child, you know, say, okay, they're leaving high school and they're going directly into a group home. It doesn't work that way anymore. It's not about choice. It's about eligibility. It's about another eligibility block, and it becomes part of the bigger discussion, which we'll talk about on Thursday.
I would like to,
go ahead. Yes, please.
I would like to respond to a question in the queue. It's never too late to get a power of attorney. Okay, so, you know, if my, I will have a 26-year-old at home in another month or two. And yes, you can establish a power of attorney for healthcare or for financial decision-making. You don't have to do it at 18, you can do it at 26. There's no cutoff or deadline.
And I'm just going to also put in that shameless plug that Mark was doing a little while ago too. Shared living, the idea of the adult service housing system. We do a lot of what's called community information sessions. Yeah. We are in the process, due to COVID-19, of recording all of them now. Some of them are already available on our website, which I'm sure Mark's going to be sending to you all. But the ones that aren't done, we're doing a few more in the fall. We're in the process of, I think, gathering 4 more presentations. So for the people that we look to, because we're not the experts, we're really not the experts in any of this. We're just kind of sharing, we're a bridge to information, but we get those experts to come back to RIPIN in this new format to give you not only the what do they say, from the horse's mouth, right? They will give you the right answers, but they also can answer those deeper questions that you might have. So more to come.
Yeah, and I'll just add too that if you can't make it to Thursday's webinar for some reason, you can't be with us live, we record all of these. They're all on our YouTube channel. They're all on our website. So just so you know, I know it's hard. It can be hard to take 2 hours out of your week to sit through something like this, but they're all recorded for you to view as is convenient for you, just so you know.
What does some of our partners say? We'll watch them at 2 in the afternoon or 2 in the morning, whenever you want to watch them.
Parents have, it's been such a surprise to hear from parents who like that idea, because they don't have to get childcare. They don't have to, you know, they don't have to go and watch something. And we try to keep them as short as possible. You know, it's not like coming in, this workshop, it was normally be done in 2 hours. So to be able to kind of do this, they can do it, like you say, whether it's at 2 o'clock or after a child goes to bed or before they go to school. But before, they might not have had that kind of access. So we hope that, we hope this is helpful.
We have another question. Someone asked us to clarify, if a parent has guardianship, does the disabled adult keep their right to vote?
Not according to the voting ballot that I filled out to request the other day, and I've done it now twice for the primary and the general election. It asks that question right on there. It asks if the person completing the form is mentally incapacitated. And when you take guardianship, when you go through guardianship, that's what you're saying, that the person is unable to make any decisions on their own, any. And just a little, food for thought. There are actually states around the country that are trying to eliminate guardianship. And this is for everyone, whether it's for our, young person with a developmental disability or our elderly mom or dad. The idea of taking away all their rights to making any decisions on their own behalf is a big step. And yes, from what I read, and what, I'm looking at it actually as we speak, that is a question on there, at least in Rhode Island.
That's all the questions we have, it looks like, for today.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for that great presentation. Thank everyone for attending. And like we said, you can contact RIPIN at any time if you have questions about this or any related topics. Feel free to reach out to us directly, give us a call, send us an email. We have peer professionals who they've lived through this. They work with it every day. They're experts and they're here to help you. So feel free to reach out. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Stay safe.